Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story. Aboard Air Force One, President Donald Trump commented on whether he would deal with the Chinese Communist Party leader Xi Jinping directly on the final trade deal details.
Yeah, I could see that.
Reciprocal and retaliatory tariffs between the U.S. and China officially decreased today. A look at which side blinked first.
Xi Jinping can say America blinked, but what we've done is step down to still a very high tariff, much higher than what China's putting on us.
And the U.S.-UK trade deal could see Chinese products excluded from UK supply chains. That's to prevent Chinese goods from entering the U.S. through backdoor. Stanford's own newspaper is reporting that Chinese spies are active on its campus and that they're stealing all kinds of intelligence. More on the evidence it uncovered. President Trump discussing both the U.S. trade deal with China and Qatar's offer of a Boeing jet as the new Air Force One during an interview on Tuesday. NTD's Dana Monahan has more on that, plus the new sanctions connected to Iranian oil shipments to Beijing.
Aboard Air Force One, the president commented on whether he would deal with China's Xi directly on the final trade deal details, speaking on Fox News Channel's Hannity.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, I'm not sure that it'll be necessary, but that happened with the UK.
Trump says the trade agreement has a lot of potential benefits for both nations.
It was mentioned, but we don't talk about it yet. That's the opening up of China to U.S. business. And that would be like opening up a whole new world, and I think it would be even better for China.
Meanwhile, the U.S. Treasury has sanctioned more than 20 companies accused of helping Iran ship billions in oil to China. Funds officials say were used to fuel Iran's missile program, drone development, and terrorist attacks. The network tied to Iran's military and front company, Sefer Energy, includes firms in Singapore and China. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says the department has rapidly moved to implement President Trump's maximum pressure campaign on Iran. Bessent says the United States will continue targeting this primary source of revenue so long as the regime continues its support for terrorism and proliferation of deadly weapons. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
Tariffs have been drying up trade between the world's two largest economies, but they're officially coming down today. The U.S. will lower its tariffs on Chinese imports from 145% to 30%. China, in turn, will reduce its duties on American goods from 125% to 10%. The pause will last for 90 days. A question remains, who blinked first? China cheered the tariff pause. State-owned media outlets painted it as a sign that the U.S. is backing down. It justified the claim by saying Beijing didn't bulge when hiking its tariffs. But here's a look at the big picture. This is what U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said about which side called the other first back before the trade talks in Geneva.
There are lots of calls, Laura, is that there isn't a first call. There are a lot of contact points over time.
According to President Trump, the real victory wasn't about numbers, it was about leverage.
The best part of the deal was that we opened up China. China agreed to open itself up to American business to go in. China will also suspend and remove all of its non-monetary barriers. They've agreed to do that.
Trump also noted that tariffs could go substantially higher if no long-term deal is reached after the 90-day window. At the same time, he also assured Americans that the duties won't return to the previous 145% level. And this is what Bessent said about U.S. reliance on China.
We do not want a generalized decoupling from China, but what we do want is a decoupling for strategic necessities, which we were unable to obtain during COVID.
Both sides agree to set up a new mechanism to maintain ongoing dialogue. Secretary Bessent says another round of talks is expected in the coming weeks. That's as both sides move towards a more comprehensive agreement. Adding to that, President Trump says he might speak to Chinese leader Xi Jinping at the end of the week. Zooming out, the U.S. slashed duties on parcels valued at less than $800 from 120% to 54%. On the tech front, the U.S. called out Chinese tech giant Huawei. The company plans to sell its latest chip worldwide, but Washington says that would violate U.S. export controls. Meanwhile, the executive director of the Port of Los Angeles spoke about the trade situation. The port handles roughly 40% of America's shipping container imports. He told the Wall Street Journal that he doesn't predict a surge in imports coming, even with the 90-day tariff pause. The American Apparel and Footwear Association said even though tariffs on China have come down, there would still be higher prices on back-to-school and holiday orders. The association's president said what's needed is a long-term deal, not just with China, but with all U.S. trade partners. There's been a lot of action in the past days after the U.S. and China announced a trade deal over the weekend. But one question is widely circulating: who blinked first and who won the upper hand? To discuss it, we spoke with China analyst John Pelson. He's the author of the book Wireless Wars: China's Dangerous Domination of 5G and How We're Fighting Back. John Pelson, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
Good to be here again, Tiffany.
Now, with the 90-day pause in the U.S.-China trade war, the 145% tariffs now down to 30% on China, which side blinked first, the U.S. or China?
Well, say what you want about Trump, but he's a pretty tough negotiator, and he has one tactic that he seems to have used here. He likes to come out with outrageous demands, really over the top, that people go on about how this is not reasonable. And then he backs down and seems to concede. And that's what I think he's done here. So he's made it look like, okay, Xi Jinping can say America blinked. But what we've done is step down to still a very high tariff, much higher than what China's putting on us. So I think we came out the winner on this one.
Now, we did hear from both President Trump and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent saying that we don't want to decouple from China. We've heard that from previous administrations, from Biden, Clinton, so on. But at the same time, the U.S. is still really pushing to cut reliance or dependence on China for critical minerals and also, semiconductors and all these different industries. So how should we be reading that almost messaging coming from the White House not wanting to decouple?
Tiffany, there are, in my opinion, only two legitimate schools of thought here. You can either say we should not be trading anything strategic with China. So that means don't sell them anything that can help them in the military or intelligence entities, no high-end chips, and don't buy anything from them. Don't be reliant on them for anything that's important. That's one side. The other school of thought is if this is a rival or an enemy, don't be trading with them at all. So we would be cutting back anything we could possibly cut back, because you're giving money and profits and success to a country that sees us as an enemy. So I think at the very least, we can't be trading strategic items. And to the extent we can decouple as much as possible, I think that's what you have to be doing.
Now, Trump did say tariffs might rise again after this 90-day pause, but they won't go back up to the 145%. Now, when it comes to accountability, China has already seemed to be breaking its promises. It's secretly buying Venezuelan oil. That's according to both Reuters and Oil Price. Now, Trump did promise anyone buying Venezuelan oil would get a 25% tariff. So could we see tariffs on China immediately go up to 55% now because of that?
Yeah, there's a saying about doing business with China, which is once the contract is signed, let the negotiations begin. So we can reach any kind of a deal we want with China, and we should expect that they will immediately be reneging on it, whether they're doing it overtly or just behind the scenes. So that should be the working assumptions we have in any agreement that we're going to reach with them.
And given China or communist China's history of breaking its promises or not following the rules, we saw that all the way back from the first Trump administration all the way back to when China joined the World Trade Organization. How do you see this Trump administration ensuring accountability or that China lives up to its end of the deal?
Now, Trump is a tough guy for them to read. I'm sure part of that is deliberate on his part, and part of that is probably part of his nature in that he's prone to changing his mind or changing his approach based on either his view on how the situation's evolving or based on the advice he's getting. So China, I think, knows that anything that they agree to on our side can be undone. I mean, look at the TikTok deal in their favor. He was an advocate for shutting TikTok down and banning it, which I certainly support. He's now stepped back from that, and he can bring the hammer down in the opposite direction just as easily.
John Pelson, as always, thank you so much for joining us.
Good to be here.
Beijing is criticizing a clause in the US-UK trade deal. The agreement could see Chinese products excluded from UK supply chains. The clause is meant to safeguard US interests. That's through upholding high standards for economic security. NTD's international correspondent Malcolm Hudson has more for us from London.
China has criticized the trade deal between the United States and the United Kingdom. The key point here is a clause which could push Chinese products out of British supply chains to stop them entering America. Signed last week, the US-UK trade deal includes strict security requirements for British steel and pharmaceutical industries, meaning these goods should not be exported from Britain to America if they originally came from China. This stops the UK being a backdoor for circumventing America's trade and security measures. The clause seeks to safeguard US national interests. It could also involve blocking Chinese takeovers of British companies. Britain's last remaining steelworks, British Steel, was bought by Chinese investment firm Jingye in 2020. But last month, the British government intervened after Jingye tried to close the loss-making steelworks down. If the furnace had shut, Britain would be the only leading European country unable to make its own steel, and would instead depend on imports, such as from China. Beijing has opposed the trade deal clause as detrimental to China. It says trade clauses like these pressure nations into excluding Chinese products. Malcolm Hudson, NTD News, London.
Coming up, Stanford's own newspaper is reporting that Chinese spies are active on its campus and that they're stealing all kinds of intelligence. More on the evidence it uncovered. Corporate espionage, how China's Huawei allegedly cultivated a spy inside Denmark's leading telecommunications company.
Built a personal relationship with the guy and, got him to provide, which could have been a $200 million win for them, had not the security staff found out.
In a battle in the skies above Kashmir, Pakistan claims it brought down Indian fighter jets using Chinese-made planes. Why the incident has caught the attention of U.S. defense circles. That and more after the break here on China in Focus. Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Shifting gears to national security concerns, one of Stanford's own newspapers, the Stanford Review, is raising awareness about Chinese espionage activities on its campus. After interviewing dozens of Stanford's professors, students, and faculty members, the newspaper has come to a conclusion. There are Chinese spies actively collecting intelligence at the school. None of the interviewees would speak on the record out of fear of retaliation from the Chinese regime or from Stanford's own academic community. According to the report, lab workflows, software, and communication channels used by the school and even student research projects are all targets. The university responded to the report, saying, quote, "Stanford takes its commitment to national security with the utmost seriousness, and we are acutely aware of the threat posed by the Chinese Communist Party to all research universities." Espionage in top American schools is only one part of the story. The Chinese Communist Party's economic espionage goes much further. The CCP has many tactics for economic espionage. One of them is by targeting and corrupting a specific individual in an important position inside a foreign company. After years of preparation, that person may become useful to Beijing when the time is right. This was the case involving Chinese tech giant Huawei. Here's how Huawei cultivated Dove Goldstein, a former engineer at TDC, Denmark's leading telecommunications company, to gain an edge in a $200 million deal. We spoke earlier with retired senior intelligence officer Nicholas Eftimiadis about it.
In the case of Goldstein, who was out of Denmark and worked for the Denmark company TDC, who was deciding between Huawei and Ericsson over who would get a $200 million contract for 5G in Denmark. And as it turns out that Goldstein was actually released Ericsson's bid to Huawei, and Huawei had cultivated him over a very, very long period of time, over some 8 years. And just in building friendships and in hosting weekly happy hours and, having him for dinner all the time, Huawei paying for it. And they cultivated him as a source inside TDC. And then ultimately, without getting paid, actually, he got his hands on the Ericsson bid and provided it to Huawei. The security apparatus was able to track him down, through CCTV and seeing him do it and leave, and then to look at his laptop and see that he had the bid, he had Ericsson's bid, and that it had been opened in the time he had left, which was to meet the Huawei representative a day before they actually made the decision. So you see this, and you know, in its essence, espionage is a human endeavor, right? They built a personal relationship with the guy, and you know, got him to provide, which could have been a $200 million win for them, had not the security staff found out. And even as they did found out, Huawei had surveillance. There was surveillance on the key officials who were making the decision. They found listening devices and microphones, in fact, in the boardroom that, you know, somehow sneaked their way in there. And when they lost the bid, the Chinese embassy sent a threatening letter to Denmark saying that this was going to impact trade relationship. You know, if they chose Ericsson, it would impact trade relationships with China. So you see, again, this coordinated activity between, and we see it all the time, between the Chinese government and its companies, particularly its national champions, to conduct espionage and to threaten, you know, those who don't cajole, you know, their advances.
The bidding happened in 2019, and there's more. Danish company TDC set up a team to investigate the case with Huawei. To avoid Huawei surveillance, they moved to another office building. But outside their office on the 15th floor, a large drone was spotted hovering. And the room it appeared to be spying on was a large whiteboard covering in the investigators' leads. The board was facing the window. What are the Chinese Communist Party's key targets for espionage? Nicholas Eftimiadis points to 3 areas.
We have about 500 of those cases, 550 cases, which are targeted towards trade secrets or technologies that actually deal with Made in China 2025. And you can see it's extraordinary that you can watch trend growth in this. So, for example, information technology, specifically semiconductors, right after 2015 and the U.S. sanctioned ZTE, it skyrockets as to how China's doing it. And as one might figure, in COVID, the collection against biotechnologies, specifically vaccine development, again, takes a very, very strong uptick. Aerospace technologies, particularly led by the Ministry of State Security and State-owned enterprise, collection of those has been a mainstay for Chinese espionage services. And we see a split in those aerospace technologies between the civil commercial components and the military components.
Eftimiadis described it as an entirely different set of what we call tradecraft espionage techniques, which China applies. A warning from the Trump administration for foreign companies: steer clear of Chinese tech giant Huawei's new AI chips or risk violating U.S. export rules. Officials on Wednesday said those chips likely rely on U.S. tech. According to the U.S. Commerce Department, Huawei's new chips may violate the Foreign Direct Product Rule. This rule states that even if a product is made outside the U.S., it still falls under U.S. export laws if it was built using American technology. That means companies around the world could break U.S. law just by buying or using Huawei's chips and could face fines of up to at least $1 million. There's growing concern in Washington that Huawei plans on selling these new chips around the world. It would put Huawei in direct competition with American giants like NVIDIA. In a move to help U.S. companies stay competitive, the Commerce Department lifted an export ban. The ban stopped NVIDIA from selling AI chips to other countries. Although that rule's been lifted, the Commerce Department says a new rule will be introduced in the future. The new rule may address concerns over China's access to advanced U.S. chips. This announcement came as President Trump visited Saudi Arabia on Tuesday and secured a $20 billion investment in AI infrastructure in the region, powered by thousands of NVIDIA chips. Reports of aerial warfare are coming from Kashmir. Pakistan claimed its Chinese-made J-10 jets successfully downed Indian French-built Rafale fighters over the region. Experts say it's not just about jets, but strategy. And now the U.S. is watching closely for how it could apply to a potential conflict with China over Taiwan.
Recent air battles have been happening over Kashmir, a hotly contested region that shares part of its border with both India and Pakistan. According to U.S. officials, Pakistan used a Chinese-built J-10 aircraft to bring down an Indian Air Force Rafale fighter jet. The Rafale is a French-made 4.5 generation warplane, which may have some advantages over the 4th generation J-10. That said, both the Rafale and the J-10 are considered among the most advanced fighter jets in their class. What's more, it's not just the aircraft drawing attention. Military observers are closely watching the missile systems involved. Pakistan deployed a Chinese-made PL-15 air-to-air missile system, while India relies on the European-made Meteor missile system.
The way you can tell which party had better training or which has better warfighting capability isn't through the functionality of jets itself. It largely depends on their battle strategies in the air, or how they use electronic warfare. It's pretty clear that Pakistan sent intel about the target in India to a jet by using a Chinese-made early warning alert system. That's how Pakistan's Chinese-made jet downed an Indian jet.
The incident has caught the attention of U.S. defense circles because it may offer possible insights into how Chinese air power might perform in a future conflict, particularly in the Taiwan Strait.
India should learn from NATO or the U.S. Army in terms of their training systems, or America's database system. That way, India can effectively increase its combat ability in the air or on the ground.
Meanwhile, the Indian Air Force acknowledged the losses on Sunday, stating losses are a part of combat. But the country offered no further comment or details, only confirming that all pilots involved had returned safely.
That's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. For on-the-clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.